Hello everyone, and welcome to my video on creating a stained glass soap for this month's Soap Club Challenge. I am not a fan of melt and pour, but I am familiar with it, so I wasn't too stressed out over this challenge. For the base, I really didn't want just a plain white, so I tried to kind of do a modified clamshell in the middle of it. And then as you can see, I poured white on top to kind of cover up the color. Surprisingly, I think it worked pretty well. So I was happy with that. The design that I decided to do were scales, mermaid scales, dragon scales, fish scales, whatever you want it to be. I used the water-soluble paper to print out my design, so that I could overlay it on top of my pattern and then use that to pipe. I knew I was not going to be freehanding it. There was no way I was going to freehand it and get nice, even, consistent scales. So once I finished pouring my base, I simply laid the water-soluble paper over it, and it worked pretty well. So then, while I was waiting for my black to set up, I prepared my colors that I was going to use for my melt and pour stained glass portion. I used about a tablespoon of glycerin to half a teaspoon of colorant and just mixed it in together well. This has always worked the best for me when it comes to adding color to melt and pour, so I've stuck with that. I also added glitter into some of the colors. It didn't really show up, so I don't think it was necessary. When I piped, this base was still pretty fluid. I was really happy with the consistency. It allowed me to create the best tracing that I think I was able to do. I had tried another version and the soap was just too thick and it didn't come out as nicely. This is not perfect by any means, but it's not bad. So I was happy enough with it. The only problem was I wish my lines had been a little bit taller. As you'll see later on, some of the melt and pour kind of migrated over between some of the scales because there just wasn't quite enough definition, but for the overall purposes it worked pretty well. So I've melted down my melt and pour now that the piping has set up. I add my color to it and spritz rubbing alcohol and use a pipette to fill each scale. It's pretty simple. I screwed up. You can see how I actually printed out the scales and I colored them in so that I had a guide to follow so I would not screw up my colors. And I still screwed up. Yeah, I don't even know how I did it. I know when I realized I had done it, when I finished doing the black, which is the next color you're going to see me pour, I realized I had screwed up. And there wasn't much I could do. A little tip when you are doing melt and pour: one, cover your glass with plastic wrap. Two, I did use a small bit of melt and pour and I melted one color at a time. And I have it pretty hot. It's not super hot, but it's definitely pretty hot so that it stays fluid for the time I needed to pipe it. So I didn't have to do any reheating. My soap never set up or got too hard on me in the time I needed to pipe. Or I should say, use the pipette to fill the scales. So you can see here I'm on my my fourth color, and I've realized that I need 6 colors and not the 5 that I had planned. As I finished filling in this dark purple, I still had open spots because I screwed up. So what I did was I took some of the leftover magenta and the leftover light purple colorant I had, mixed them together and filled in the rest of the scales, and it worked. I don't think you would know unless I pointed it out. So after this had hardened, I took my clear base and poured it over, and I had issues. One, my base it was hot. It wasn't gelling, but it was hot. And I think it was affecting the melt and pour, keeping it just too soft. You can see as I started to pour that the corner started to melt. There wasn't much I could do. I just kind of continued to pour. 2 of the bars did not come out because they were all melty, but the other 4, as you see pictured here, actually came out pretty well. So I was happy overall with them. The top base is slightly less clear than I wanted because I had glycerin dew forming, which no matter what I do always happens. But there you go, my submission for this month's challenge. I hope you enjoyed.